Hi everybody, welcome to the World of Character. My name is Caitlin Larson, I'm a YA fantasy writer. I'm going to let the panelists all introduce themselves and name their favorite YA world with any genre.
Hi, I'm Roshani Chokshi. I'm the author of the Star Touch Queen. I think my favorite fantasy world would have to be, I said this before on the panel, so if it's boring, I'm sorry, but I'm really obsessed with the halls of sleep in Greek mythology because I just want to be a dream manifested and run around. Like the Taylor Swift song. I'm very dressed like a daydream. But actually, okay.
Does that have to be a fantasy world?
No.
Okay, well I'm going to pick one anyway. Hey, I'm Lindsay Cummings. I'm the author of The Murder Complex, The Balance Keepers, and most recently Zenith with Sasha, who's my co-author. Thanks for the applause, guys. I've also already answered this question before, but I'm going to go with Narnia because I really like animals more than like humans, and I just want to talk to them. We make cat noises all the time.
All right,
so
I'm sorry.
I'm Alex, I'm the author of the Darkest Mind series, as well as Passenger, which is a time travel adventure. Quite amazing. New team. I think if I could pick a fictional world to inhabit, I would actually pick a universe, which is the Star Wars universe, because I would like to go to many planets and meet many different kinds of aliens and people.
Hi, I'm Aveyard. I'm the author of the Red Queen series. Okay, thank you. We're all like queens in some way.
But you guys have normal adult-sized heads, so your crowns fit. I have a child-sized head.
Mine was repetitive because I also have a down.
Do you? I need to find them. Okay.
Okay. My favorite YA, well, you know what? I could make the argument that Lord of the Rings is YA because Frodo is a tween. Totally.
Yeah.
So he's a tween.
Yeah.
He's like 30 something.
In Hobbit.
That's only in the movie. In the novel, he's actually 50 at the beginning
Yeah, it
of the
takes
journey.
some time, but he's still like in his childish way.
He's very emo.
Yeah. You both made the argument for Star Wars kind of being a little.
That's true, because Luke and Leia are both only like 18 or 19.
I guess if we have to stick to YA, I'm surprised no one has said Harry Potter yet.
That's a bit
It's cheating, I know, but I'll do it.
I feel like robes are really unflattering. That's the only reason why.
You and I would be at, oh my god, I always mispronounce it. Bobaton?
Oh, yeah.
I always call it
You and I would be like in the
Yes.
Yeah.
We would have a chair pulled like
Pegasus.
Pegasus.
French
It's my turn. Sorry, I'm taking so long. Hi, I'm Susan Dennard. I'm the author of Something Strange and Deadly series and Truth Witch. Woohoo! Thanks. I got cheer too! Just like a Viking flat for you. My favorite world is very random. I know Alex knows it, but it was the first thing I ever wrote fanfiction in. And it was Dinotopia. Does anyone? Yes! Okay, thank you, my people! Let's go together! Dinotopia is our jam. It's our jam! Our freaked out last summer. Same time of the year, actually, last July. If we could just sit in a room with Dinotopia books listening to Enya, we would just... That's literally what we did on tour together. We just played Enya the whole time. But yes, Dinotopia was my obsession. I like dinosaurs. And it was like, there's no war or conflict there. There's like literally no plot in that book, but I didn't care. It had pretty pictures and I wanted a dinosaur, so.
Oh my god. Deep cut. I love it.
Okay, so this question is going to start out pretty broad. How, when you're approaching world building, like what are your first steps? And if you've written in more than one genre or you've explored more than one, did that change your approach at all?
Do you want us to go down the line or just hop on?
Hop on.
For most stuff, I start with an image. So for Red Queen, it was an image of a girl in an arena about to be executed, and she kills her executioner with lightning. And then I was asking myself questions of how to make this a real thing that could possibly happen. So answering those questions made the world bigger and bigger and bigger. But then one of the other really important steps that I always go through for Red Queen and also for other stuff that I'm working on that is not fit to print yet. I love drawing maps, and it's sort of like my pastime hobby. Yeah, I love it. So I draw a map because I'm a really visual learner and a visual writer, so I need to know sort of the space that I'm occupying, and I find that the map really informs everything else because obviously geography informs culture, religion, every piece of society based on where the mountains and rivers are. Yeah, so it's really my foundation.
Someone else, go.
I usually start with character, and then like I get an image like kind of like you, but it's of a character. Like for the murder complex, it was Meadow, this girl that looks like she's almost like bathed in moonlight, and she's like holding an old dagger, and she has like a barcode on her forehead, and I'm like, you know, where did the barcode come from, and why, and who did the dagger come from, and just start asking those questions, and then I build the world around her. But actually, strangely for Balance Keepers, it's about a school that's in the core of the earth, where students have magical powers, and they use those to help prevent natural disasters from happening to the surface of the earth. And I just kind of knew, I wanted to know like what's in the core of the earth besides like what that awful movie, The Core, is about. And so that was the first time in any of my writing that I started with an image and then started adding people to it. So I think it's really different with every story. It always starts with a kernel of some sort, and then you just build from there.
When I approach world building, I'm kind of like Victoria. I always start off with an image of something. But if any of you read The Star Touch Queen, you know I get carried away with settings, and it's not sorry. But I think that depending on what you're writing, you kind of want to think about the culture that you're drawing from or that you're making up. And I think so much of that informs the logic and the magic system of that world building, so that you know all these details that may or may not even come across to the reader because you don't want to info dump, but they make these small, tiny leaps in logic, and I think that's what makes it feel like a world that's realized, even if you don't see all of it. So,
The iceberg.
the iceberg, yep.
So, well, I was going to say I've only written in our world, but that's not true because I always forget about my debut, which was set in an invented fantasy world.
And also Star Wars.
Also Star Wars. You always forget Star Wars.
world. It could be our world.
It was a long time ago. Exactly. We just haven't reconnected with them yet. Anyway, for The Darkest Mind and Passenger, it was set in versions of our world, which was really interesting and cool to write. But it's usually, I feel like with my world building, I always start with a character, and it's really an interrogation of the character, like you guys were saying, to figure out why they are the way they are. And I'm lucky enough that, I guess this is part of the X factor mystery of writer, where sometimes a character just lands in your head, and that's how you get to interrogate them. It's not so much that you're developing the character, they just arrive fully formed, like Athena in Zeus's head. She's just there. So that's sort of what happened with Ruby, and I was like, well, why are you so closed off? Like, what's happened to you? But it's also a matter of something that I've noticed about our world that I want to kind of think about or comment on, or a question I want to try to answer for people. I grew up, for example, in the Darkest Mind series, I was a freshman in high school when September 11th happened. And so I wanted to try to capture that feeling of how quickly the world changes in the aftermath of a huge national tragedy. And I wanted to reflect that in the writing because that was a very, I mean, you guys know it was a very strange time and how quickly things were changing and happening, and how quickly people forget better judgment because their emotional stakes are very high and all of that. So it's usually a combination of figuring out why the characters the way they are and focusing on something that's happening in our world. For instance, in the story that I'm working on now, all of a sudden, I guess because I just moved back to Arizona, I'm extremely freaked out about our limited water supply on this planet. So that is really informing the book that I'm working on.
I will say for advice-wise for any writers out there, it is much better to come from character than from world. You'll run into a lot of problems if you start with world and then try and shove characters into it, because I always run into that problem. So please listen to me, start with character.
As soon as I say not as I
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm actually not that way though. I mean, they're together, I guess. I mean,
I just remember getting yelled at a lot in school for starting.
I mean, I think you're right. No, I see what, you want your characters to feel real, so you should almost always, everything, the plot should be dictated by character. So that's true, right, totally. You should start with character. But, well, like, you wrote in a historical setting.
That's
But
true.
when you do history, you got stuff you gotta stick to. And that can be very hard, especially when you're adding fantasy or time travel elements. So my first series is historical, and aside from the zombies, it's pretty darn accurate. I tried really hard. I did my research, and made myself never want to do that again. So
Historical research is wonderful, but it's
intense.
yeah, it's intense.
I don't know how you did it with so many different times. Like,
Well, Victoria helped me brainstorm alternate history, which was fun.
That's another pastime.
Yeah.
but my problem is always like I'm a gamer, and so I'm an RPG gamer, and so I make worlds that are way too big, and it's a problem. And it's a problem I'm now super encountering with the Truth Witch sequel, and then I'm like, I hate this world that is way too big, and I spent so much procrastination time fleshing out my iceberg. And I just used that as an excuse not to write, and now the world is so fully formed in my head that it's hard to insert things, and also I'm trapped by the rules that I set up and established, and so as like I'm having to teach myself to think smaller, and you know, it's okay to not have 3 empires. One's enough. And yeah, and so, and then of course, like my first Truth Witches, if you guys have seen the map, it's like very, very, very loosely European looking, which was intentional. And so I very, very, very loosely based the empires in it on 3 empires that were in power in this sort of alternate Renaissance time, and then I just went from there. So that's kind of like where the first idea for it came from. And so that was fun because you get to do the Wikipedia vortex of like, what was happening in the empire at that time, and that's how I ended up coming up with the 20-year truce, because there was actually a 12-year truce between Holland, the Netherlands, and Spain. They had been at war for a very long time, and then they were like, hey, I'm out of money, and they were like, we're out of money too. Let's like go back to war in 12 years, and they were like, cool, see you in 12 years. And so I was like, I can't believe that's a real thing, you know. My Wikipedia vortex unfolded that, and I was like, oh, perfect, that fits into this world idea I'm working on. So they have a 20-year truce, and yeah. Real world history has a lot of fun stuff.
History is fantastic.
So a few of you touched on when you've built a world that kind of writes you into a corner. And when that happens, how do you try to combat it? Do you try to change your world? Do you try to change your plot to fit the situation?
It depends on if it's a first book or a second book.
Yeah. Once it's published,
Right.
you have to figure it out. You have to go back to the drawing board. But yeah, time travel is like all rules, and like I thought I was being super smart by having it be magic based instead of science based. But it's like constantly running into paradoxes, constantly like you change one little thing and it ripples out and affects everything else in their world. So I'm like, more rules.
Yeah. I think more than anything, writing yourself into a corner, I think that requires like a change in your own perspective. So instead of looking at things head on, you turn it upside down and look at it from a different angle. And sometimes that works. I think distance is one of the best things you can do to help yourself writing. I can't tell you how many chapters I've written and like finished and put into the master document and said, that was garbage. Oh my God, I can't, like, when I come back to this, I'm going to slip my own throat because I really want to fix it. And then I come back and I'm like, oh, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And I think a lot of problems, like I definitely will have moments where I write just in bold, this happens, and then I'll move on to the next thing.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
And by the time you finish and come back, you have you have fresh eyes, you have a new perspective, and you can think, oh, they're going to go this way instead of this way that I wanted them to go. And it really helps you, and it helps you be a little easier on yourself if you give yourself the right to have that really terrible rough draft, because we all have them.
When I had to write the Death Code, the sequel to Murder Complex, I had to rewrite it like 5 times because it wasn't working, and it was like the worst time ever in my career because I just hated everything, and I was like, I'm a fluke, like I was a one-time thing, like one-hit wonder. And then I went back to an old manuscript that I'd written that got 120 rejections from agents because it just wasn't right. I wrote myself into a corner, so I stopped working on it. And then as I went back to reread that old document, I realized like, this is literally the death code. Like, this would be the perfect sequel for the murder complex. So I used it.
That's awesome.
And that's now like the published thing.
That's such a good story in your own head.
So, right, so just like keep all your stuff, even if you think that it's bad, and if you do write yourself into a corner and you have to like escape for a while, don't get rid of anything, because you never know how it's going to work out later.
I agree with that. Do you have any solutions for corners, Roshani?
Y'all stole all the romance. I'll take the next one.
I will say sometimes if you write yourself into a corner and you're kind of like got a writer's block situation going on, it's very, 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 very likely that you went wrong earlier in the book. Maybe one scene back, maybe 15 scenes back, somebody did something they shouldn't have done. I have this problem when I'm drafting of like writing only action scenes and the really intense emotional beats. So then I have like 50 pages of all the epic stuff and nothing in between. And so then I have to like go back and write what happens and rearrange it so that like, oh, actually this will be great in the climax. Let's move that away. It shouldn't happen in the first 20 pages. And it's not that what I wrote necessarily, I didn't necessarily write them in a corner, I just put it in the wrong place, or it maybe wasn't the right time for it, so, yeah.
Your story should always be escalating. So it's been fun to think of things that are too big, too early, and be like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna hold that for later.
But it was fun writing it, yay, I was
How
tired.
Steve couldn't have happened in Fellowship of the Ring. Yeah.
Do you guys have any favorite parts of world building, or alternatively, least favorite parts?
I love trade routes. I love doing trade routes and like where the ports are. And I've done none of this for Red Queen. This is another project, but I love knowing where the ports are and like what's transporting what and who needs what and yeah.
I love it, it's adorable.
Yeah, it's fun. And tectonic plates. Okay, so there are some really great subreddits. There's one that I love, there's two. There's map making and world building, and those are fantastic. And there's this great tutorial on doing tectonic plates and creating your own world's tectonic plates to figure out where like mountains and land masses and oceans are. And then you can do the biomes and you can figure out where the winds are. So it basically tells you where the jungles and deserts and it's cool.
You guys saw when she said she liked making maps, that she just like drawing them and sketching them. She like, yeah, deep dive
It's cool.
under the crust.
It's fine. But you have to like learn how to rein yourself in, which I have not figured out yet.
Procrastination.
Yes, it is. It is absolutely procrastination.
I like to make maps, and I will spend all day, like, I need to map out this entire city, and I will draw the little houses, and I will go all in,
That
and
is death.
at the end of the day, I have this beautiful map of the capital city, you know, and I'm like, this did nothing. Because then I'll be like, wait, I shouldn't have put the castle there, and so it's like, it was really just a procrastination.
Okay, but at the same time, I'm sorry, this is a little off topic. At the same time though, it's a procrastination tool, but it's something that brings you joy.
It does, you're right.
And sometimes
It's true.
writing can be very joyless.
And you
so
discover
don't-
really
yeah.
cool things. Like I was making I was drawing a city map of this pirate republic. And I was just kind of, I'm an ecologist, so I come at it from an ecology point of view. I'm like, where are the watersheds?
Yeah.
And so I like think about it like that. And I was like making my little map, and then I like, you draw something accidentally, and then you're like, oh, no, that's a thing. And now it's actually one of the prime set pieces in my story. And I was like an accidental little drawing, and then turned into a temple. Blah, blah, blah. So it is, you're right.
It is
Bracken.
helpful, and it helps you internalize the feel of that world, too, which is just as important as writing it. The more that you internalize and don't have to think of on a conscious level, the easier it is to write later.
No, I think that's really important, especially for knowing the atmosphere of your book in a way. And my favorite thing to write is like the food, the feasts. And especially I've always had a fixation with the food of the other world. And I love fairy tales, it's why I love writing fairy tale retellings. And there's always that warning, don't eat the food of the other world. Don't eat the pomegranate seed. Don't take the poisoned apple. What is it that you're imbibing of this world that takes something out of you? And I'm obsessed with that. And I think I get really, really carried away with things like in the Star Touch Queen, there's trees that grow edible gems and whatever else. And I want to know the food that floats, and I want to know what it does to you. And I think that it's really fun, but also it lends like this a bit of sinisterness to it, because it's not just a person walking through a world, it's a person interacting with it on every level. So.
I really like I have a lot of action scenes in my stories. Like if someone's not dying, I don't care. And I know. And so I love picking out like the weapons that they have. Like that's fun for me in some like sick way. And then my favorite thing, like I've been working on this fantasy book for like 2 years, and I forced my husband to play The Witcher 3
Oh, let's discuss.
and Skyrim for the past like 2 or 3 years. And he's like, babe, like I need to eat. I'm like, no, you play Skyrim. I just sit there and watch it all. Like I have all the like $30 manuals to it, and I just sit there and I'm like, Skyrim, but I've never actually played it because I made myself sick.
Vicky is really good.
Oh yeah.
You can change the camera, sorry. You can slow down the cameras to change motion sickness, because I do too. Anyway, sorry. Gamer tip.
I was gonna add, kind of going off of what you guys were saying about the atmosphere and developing atmosphere. I find that's very important, especially in real world sets too, because that's one way to really make, I think, world building stand out and shine. So in The Darkest Minds, it is like a very, I was talking about this with the screenwriter who wrote the script for maybe a film, I don't know. It just exists somewhere out there. But he was like, how do you see this world? This is how I see it based on your writing. And I was like, yes, that's it. It's very gloomy. It's set at a certain time of year in Virginia that's very overcast and drizzly. It's like, so when I start a book and I'm trying to figure out what the world is like, I do one of those flow charts. It's the only time I ever make a flow chart, and I just write words all over the page. The Darkest Minds is crazy. It's like classic rock, Waffle House,
Like a mind
Walmart.
map.
Yeah, like it just is like,
It's like Pinterest.
it's Pinterest but with words.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know, I was not into Pinterest at that point, but now Pinterest can do it.
I do a mind map like every day when I'm trying to figure out a
That's a really
scene. I
good
do them
one.
all the time.
Cool.
Everyone's different.
Find what works for your brain.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Give yourself the permission to experiment.
Yes.
As you guys create and develop your worlds, how do you keep track of it all? Do you create a story Bible? Do you pray you remember it?
I have the Time Traveler's Guide for not getting killed in a
Yes,
terrible
yes, you do.
way in another century. That's what the document's called.
So organized.
Well, it's because there are so many rules that I invented. You did it so
So
proud.
good for you.
That's the only time I've ever done a serious Bible though.
I like always, I have like 8 billion that I've started and then I forget to add to them. And so they're just messy and they forget and like, I don't even know. The only thing I was organized with, literally the only thing was in the book, one of the characters has what's called like thread magic and she can see people's emotions and things. And they're color coded. So she knows what you're feeling based on the colors kind of hovering above you. And so I at least made a map of that and it's listed on my wall so I can constantly check. But let me tell you, it is like, I'm getting really sick of the colors I gave them because I'm like, how many times can I say someone is turquoise and therefore surprised? Like, people are so sick of this color. I'm sick of it. I need better colors. Don't do it.
Scrivener, I think, is really good to organize. The actual documents themselves for a lot of mine are just kind of a hodgepodge, but having them all in one window so I can click like religion or family tree or whatever. Because it's like religion does not play a part really in Red Queen, but in a different one where I just went crazy. Yeah, but then for Red Queen, I definitely have a master document, and it's just called Red Queen Info. And it has like the houses, the colors, what their abilities are, and a little tidbit about them, and then it has the different parts of the map. And then I have the map that I made, like I printed out a very blank map of North America and highlighted where every country was. I have that on my little wall. And then I have a timeline that I really don't refer to, which I should.
Oh gosh,
Timeline world building shame. Like that's amazing. One of my friends actually, she's been working on a fantasy project forever, and she has her own private wiki that she's created and is filling out herself. So in theory, one day she could just release it publicly, but I was like, that's a lot of work.
Pinterest helps too. I have a couple secret Pinterest.
I have secret Pinterest too. Pinterest things.
Your boutique partners are sometimes the most helpful people. Mine will just be like, you can't do that. But why? I also think that kind of it just depends on how you structure the world building right from the start. What I did with the Star Touch Queen universe is I drew a lot from Hindu mythology. And the mythology is strange because the other worlds themselves are kind of structured like tiers of cake. And if you go to one, it doesn't affect the other. And that's really easy to be lazy because I'm just like, well, I'm in like snake land and not monkey kingdom, so no, I can do what I want. But yeah, I wish that I had a map that I could color code, but I get really mad at myself for not being able to color within the lines.
I have like giant notebooks full of just absolute crap, but like writing out that stuff, like, it helps me. Like,
I'm the same.
I got that from you, actually.
Oh, did you?
Because I have emailed you
Yes,
and
and I
Sarah
did.
a
I
lot
wrote
over the
about
past
the
year, and I'm
like
like,
serious thing. I remember that
please
now.
help me figure out how to do this. And so like I just stalked her writing advice stuff, and legitimately it helped me so much. And for Zenith, Sasha and I have like an entire galaxy that has like systems and planets and moons, and everyone has different cultures, and so we have like different Google Docs for like here is what the planet of Arcadius looks like here's the setting, here's like a document for their weapons, here's a document for like the hot guys we want to put on the planet. We filled up so many documents that I literally had to go and purchase more space on Google because we have so many documents, but it just keeps everything straight, and I guess we should have just done Scrivener. Like, that makes so much more sense now.
But you couldn't have shared.
Can't have shared,
Yeah,
no, it's
yeah,
really
that's
smart.
true.
Smart.
When you're pulling from real world history or myth like you did, when do you decide what to use and what to leave behind and what you're allowed to manipulate?
Because Red Queen is set in like post-apocalyptic North America, like basically after a modern dark age, and everything was kind of reformed. Some things that I chose not to include, I just did not include religion whatsoever, at least in this particular country, and I just made my life a little bit easier by not involving that. Although it does get hard when I have characters who normally would be like, oh God, or Jesus Christ in that moment, and I'm like, crap, I can't say that. And I get to the point where I'm like, can they even say like, oh heavens? I don't know if they believe in it. But then there's like little things that are fun for me to pepper in. I remember cut from the first draft of Red Queen, there was a point where they go into like this ruin that used to be a cafe, and someone steps on a green straw, so it's Starbucks. And then I was like, okay, it's been 1,000 years. I know those green straws don't decompose, but I don't think it was there. But for me, it's the peppering in real world stuff and saying like, oh, this place that used to be Washington, D.C. is now called the Wash, and Florida is the Floridians because it's an island chain now. That's just fun. So I think finding joy in the world building pieces is really
It's a little
important.
bit like what they did on the 100, where like, you guys, I'm not even joking, I did not get the like jokes with in the inside, I did not get the jokes with the Ton, DC, I went over my head, I was like, oh, Washington, DC, until I saw it actually spelled out. Sometimes it's like,
Yeah,
it's
too
too
smart.
smart. Yeah, I was like, my Tom is such an interesting name, I wonder where they got it from.
It's amazing how many people either immediately figured out Red Queen was our world or don't figure it out until they saw a map. And it's weird what certain people will hook into and what people will either miss
They
or
bring their
connect.
own.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
My rule with writing historical fiction is really, I think I said this on the Ravenclaw your channel already, or the other day, it's just like if I can't, I try very, very hard to find information. I go like deep, I go to JSTOR, I go into journals, I do everything I possibly can to find something out. And if I can't find it, then my rule is I can include it if I cannot disprove that it would have been there. So like if I need there to be like arrests, or if I need, okay, here's an example. So, no one really knows where, oh my gosh, you just blinked. I did it again, we were talking about this at lunch now, where I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna blank on the panel today, I'm so dehydrated.
There goes the thoughts.
Nathan Hale.
Yes.
That was the name I was looking for. He is the spy who was hung during the Revolutionary War. Yes. Okay, thank you.
You know more about this than I do.
Yeah, I was like, I need a confirmation I didn't just
No,
get,
you're fine.
because there are Hales in Teen Wolf, and sometimes like, does the wrong Hale and
All those guys they hang on Team Wolf.
yeah, all the guys that hang with Teen Wolf. Anyway, I'm sorry guys. The point is, no one actually agrees where he was hanged. This is the guy who had, anyway. I don't want to get into it. It's too much of a deep dive, but no one knows exactly where he was hanged. So I kind of just had to choose for passenger. I had to decide based on the evidence where that actually was. Because some people think it was down in Manhattan. Other people, including the historical plaque that New York has, it thinks it was up on like 3rd Avenue around like 64th Street. So certain decisions like that, you just have to like, I'm going to decide that this is how this famous building was situated where it no longer exists and no one has actually, you'd be shocked by how little people think to write down about their day-to-day lives because they just take it for granted. So you kind of have to imagine.
Yeah, you have to be decisive in both your world building and your storytelling at some point. You can't really hedge your bets too far into it.
Yeah.
Sorry, I kind of just like remembered something. I was like, oh, that's smart, good.
Yeah. Sorry about that rambly answer, guys.
Oh, no, it was great.
I went into my post-lunch.
Colonial history.
My colonial history. No one cares, Alex. Stop it.
Oh, we can.
But the history point's good. And it also actually feeds a lot into when you're writing retellings and you're drawing from mythology, like world mythology or something else, you have to tread a very fine line between showing off how much you know and making sure that the story is accessible. And that was a really big challenge for me with Star Touched Queen because it drew on hint of mythology. And I'd grown up with those stories, they were part of my childhood. And I had to be aware of what people would know or what people would not know and how far to go into explaining. But what you mentioned really struck me because people, if you can't disprove something, then it really affects the way that you include it. And when you're dealing with fairy tales, there is no one version of a fairy tale. And when you're dealing with a culture where that mythology so closely intersects with its religion, you can get into very dangerous ground. So I think that don't be afraid when you're doing that because I promise you that this place is wide and no one is going to agree on the right kind of story. Just prize the storytelling itself and making sure that people can fall into it.
I don't have anything smart to add.
Mine was like a last minute thing, so I'm just really excited. It just happened.
I'd love to open it up to questions if anybody has any.
How do you keep from overloading details?
I'm so bad.
I would not tell you.
Yeah.
Second readers come in. Yes. What's overloading to you isn't necessarily overloading to another person. It's like, I know a lot of us could read details and deep world building all day long and really enjoy it, but that doesn't make for a good story or an interesting story for the regular audience.
Right. A lot of, yeah, I was going to say, like in my first drafts, I go way overboard describing things because a lot of it is you figuring out the world and you include it, but you don't necessarily need it or you don't necessarily need it at that front. You don't need to front load the story with details about the world that can be spread throughout. You just can't see yet how it can be spread throughout. I mean, with Passenger, for instance, some of it is just subjective. As you were saying, like, some people love the historical details in Passenger, other people hate it and think it's slow, like they don't care, they care more about the characters or they care more about the romance or more about the adventure. Okay. Well, who cares? It's different strokes for different folks. So like you can't necessarily please everyone, but if the world building detail doesn't relate directly to the plot or to the character development, then you probably don't need it.
I would also say try and find an active way to show your world building. Yeah, so for Red Queen, I was running into trouble trying to explain people with superpowers versus people who didn't, and instead of having a character just say like, this just isn't going to sell, and I was like, but that's the story. So I'm glad I did it.
Do we have?
I was just wondering, how much world building do you do before you start to actually start writing the book? Like, if you have an idea for, the world, do you kind of try to figure it out before you get into the first draft, or do you do it as you go along? And if you do it as you go along, how do you do that?
I used to just rush into things. I was always a pantser. There's like plotters and pantsers. So plotters are obviously the people that like plot everything out before they go into it. And pantsers just dive in and kind of go as it happens. And I've actually found like a lot of value in taking time to figure out my world before I go into the story. I used to think that I didn't have like the chops to do that. But now I've found, largely because of Susan,
1876, and so I gave myself a rule, like you have a month to research everything. And of course you're gonna pause and research before that, but like I wanted to get a feel for everything, so that when I sat down to write it, I like felt like I knew what that world, like what 1876 Philly was like, and 1876 Paris. But I also knew that I could easily fall down that wormhole and use it as a procrastination technique. So I was like, okay, at the end of a month we start drafting. We've learned everything we need. We will find more as we go, but you know enough about the world and the field to go.
If you can smell the world, you're ready. I like that.
No, 1876 was smelling, let me tell you.
1876 were the undead people.
Undead, yeah, really smelling.
1776, also extremely
Oh,
scary.
smelling, yes, yes.
Little horses.
Yeah. And trash.
Chains of thoughts.
Lizzie.
I mentioned this in a panel that you were at before, but I'm struggling with finding when it's okay to pull from the past, like what things I can essentially claim as something that's okay for me to take. Like for example, one that I'm writing, I really want to put influences of the Indian caste system in that, but I'm afraid to take from that and have someone like accuse me like I'm a white girl, like there's nothing to it, like I have multicultural, but really I can't really claim that as something that I can pull from. So how do you take inspiration from something without being accused of cherry picking or saying that you're taking something, that you want to tell us part of the story, but you don't have too much.
You gave a
This
great
she
answer to
answered
that.
that.
She answered this last night, it was gorgeous and amazing. Repeat. You said that. She said the iceberg, basically. It was the same thing you said earlier about if you if you know why you have it in your world and you build that up, go. Can you finish?
I don't think Okay, I'm just
On the spot, and she's tired. I'm making her.
My face is heating up.
Sorry, gosh, I'm sorry.
I'll give you a second to. For me with Passenger, it was again, everything was there for a reason, and it wasn't a white character taking ownership over it or adopting it. Like, one of my biggest pet peeves is when, even in a fantasy world, if it's all white characters, but they're wearing like native dress, or they're wearing a Middle Eastern style dress, and it's sort of like, well, you don't have the implications of why they dress that way, and like the meaning of what that dress was. I think there is like a very fine line between honoring the past in someone else's culture and then appropriating it, and it's something we constantly talk about.
Yeah, we literally constantly talk about it. How do you balance
We're
that?
always learning too, like we do not have the correct answer. We're still getting there ourselves too. I think claim versus inspiration also. So it's different to claim something as to be inspired by than you use it in a greater piece of the world.
Yeah, I definitely echo with all of that. And to go to the iceberg thing, because I really did not remember. No, that was good. Just thoroughly researching something, even if it doesn't make it onto the page, as long as you, the author, know why, it's going to come across as cohesive world building to a reader. But I also think that you should never be afraid to explore history and all its manifestations. But ask yourself why, because the Indian caste system is interesting, but it's not just India. Japan had it. You could interpret a caste system as just a social hierarchy from any other place.
Right.
And what made the Indian caste system itself was just literally, if you've heard of the Mahabharata, it's an ancient Indian poem, and literally God was like, okay, here's your little sex, and you can just do your duty. That was it. That was the main thing. It's called dharma, just do your duty. So I think if you know the reason for why you need to have that system, it doesn't necessarily have to be Hindu. It could be anything that you want it to be. But just knowing why you're doing something makes a world of a difference. But I don't think that you should be scared.
I told you she'd have a better answer.
It was great. Thanks for giving me that moment. Because I don't know.
Yeah, I know you on the spot. Sometimes you need, especially this. Like,
I'm really bad about it too. I throw people on the spot.
She does, but you do it so enthusiastically.
You just
that
her answer
No
last
one
night like
disappoints
moved
you,
me
then.
so much.
Oh, shit. Do you have another question?
We can talk world building all day long.
That's like our favorite.
Or research themes of yours?
Do you guys, oh, no.
Oh, I just, so history informs our day-to-day life and understanding, like, the history of the United States, for example, like, really helps you understand the United States now. So for people who are kind of creating your own history in your own worlds, rather than writing historical fiction, like, how much of that history, how much
the best way to like, if you are really inspired by the way that someone did something, like take lessons from that. I do the same exact thing. My books look horrible, and I love
can't
it.
lint them out.
I get like super satisfied every time I dog ear a page, which like makes readers cringe. But for me, it's like super fun. But yeah, like your favorite books ever that like really inspired you to write books, it's okay to like watch what they did and kind of
And it's cool to see like the difference between how Tolkien world builds versus how Martin world builds. So like one's on the complete macro level, and he's starting from this huge situation, and then on the other hand, you have a small story that got bigger and bigger and bigger. You have one that started as a children's story and became like the Silmarillion and all this.
So I was wondering, how do you decide whether or not you should do sort of an alternate universe or a fictional universe versus something based in the real world? I have this series that I've been working on, but I've been kind of stalled in the world building, so I've just put it aside and I'm working on something else. But the reason is that it works so well in our universe, just kind of with magic, except it incorporates a lot of sort of church history, and I know that that could be a huge turnoff, so I'm like, should I just create an alternate world that kind of basically has a Catholic church? Or should I just base it here? And so like, when do you decide?
My Lady Jane has a really cool way that they did the Protestant versus Catholic schism.
It's really cool.
And it's still like set in the real world. It's Tudor history. It's Edward and Lady Jane Grey and all that. I guess this is going to be the really movie answer, but what feels like it's right for the story.
What is the story demand?
And I personally love the church history angle, so I'm cool with it. I know a lot of people might not be, so it might not be advice to take, but if you can find your own way into it, I guess. I do love your costume, by the way.
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, the story's gonna tell you the way it wants to be written, which is like such a stupid answer, but like it's so true.
Yeah, it's also okay to write it one way and get to the end and realize it needs to be the other way.
Okay.
Because that's not,
Like, happens a lot.
Yeah. So I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I just wondered if you guys could talk about naming things in the new world and how you get to those names. And we all love that about J.K. Rowling, right? And there's some other great authors that are just so fantastic at that. What devices do you use for naming things in the new world?
JK uses graveyards a lot.
Okay, I'm go crazy with it. So first of all, I like George R. R. Martin's advice of use names that are familiar and just tweak them a little. So Eddard is like Edward. And so I definitely did that in Truthwitch. But I also, because I have all these different cultures that I spent way too much time developing on my own. Just enough. And there's like a linguistic background to every single culture. And so this tribe, they all have like a really hard consonant in their name because that's blah, 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 and I have reasons. And clearly I go to great lengths to get it right. But I will say, like, the crowning moment recently for me was a linguistics girl emailed me to say, like, I studied this, and I just want to say that I see all the work you did, and it is amazing. I'm so impressed. And I was like, I did it! Validation! But yes, and I go to great lengths, maybe too far, so.
I think having touchstones that you know, either doing the real like heavy lifting and doing your linguistics and a strategy I saw that I liked and I kind of tried to use in another thing is you write out the whole alphabet and cross out the letters that this particular culture wouldn't really use that much, and then read the names and words from that. That's cool. It's very easy. It's a good way to kick corners. But then for Red Queen, I didn't go too deep. I just thought, silvers are kind of Roman Empire inspired a little bit. They have more luxurious names as opposed to reds with more normal names, and like Mare Barrow popped into my head, Kilorn popped into my head, Maven popped into my head. So I'm really bad at the naming advice. So some of them I don't know where they came from, but I think a lot of it comes from just internalizing your world building so much that it feels like it's coming from nowhere. But if I really try, I can trace it.
I love naming characters. I'm on behindthename.com, like for fun. Looking at etymology and different variations of spellings. Sometimes, like what you were saying, if you need a name that is like different but familiar, like there's so many different forms of Alexandra, for instance, that you can kind of play with, and they show you how different cultures have done it. But like when you're writing historical fiction, for example, they also, I think Behind the Name has most of them, but you need to actually look up what names were in use during that period. And there's a very fine line where you have to find a name that so like the name Martha, for instance, was around in the 18th century, but I feel like most younger readers today associate Martha as an older woman because that's just their generational cycle of names. So it's kind of interesting to try to balance historical accuracy plus like what wouldn't be jarring to a reader.
Yeah, everyone thinks I'm a 50-year-old woman. Susan? I don't know anyone under that age named that, so it does it. Thanks.
Yeah, I just get on like thesaurus a lot and like look up meanings of things, and then I like try and twist words like that. Also, like, it's not very smart, but like for my guys, I just really like to come up with names that sound like they'd be a hot guy.
Nice. Good, strong pencil.
What's a nice boy name? Like Jonathan. You know,
I was with William for Liam, but then there were too many Wills at the time, so I was like, how about Liam? And now they're in love with Liam.
Daniel.
Yeah, Daniel's my next
And then even she's an Irish immigrant descent. So
Yeah,
I
I
like
like that. I'm totally with you guys on just like choosing the emotional meaning of something. To me, I like to think that they're all sort of inside jokes with myself. A lot of them are actually even, they're spoilers. Maya in Sanskrit means illusion. And the premise when you start writing is if you're dealing with fate, how do you define yourself within fixed points? But then you also run into problems because trying to come up with a hot Indian guy's name that's also